I stayed frozen on the edge of his bed, fingers gripping the blanket like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. The apartment was silent, too silent, except for the faint sound of Adrian's cautious footsteps moving through the dark, then nothing. No movement. No voice, just a long, suffocating quiet, every second stretched thin and trembling. My breathing sounded too loud in my own ears. The light from the blinds painted faint stripes across the floor, and I watched them like they might shift again, like another shadow might appear. I shouldn't have followed him, but I couldn't sit still. Slowly, carefully, I stood and stepped into the hallway. The boards felt colder under my feet than they ever had. The apartment's usual nighttime hum was gone, as if the place was holding its breath with me. Adrian. I whispered. No response. I took another step, then another. His silhouette finally came into view, standing back rigid, shoulders tense, head slightly turned as if listening to something I couldn't hear. He didn't notice me at first. He was staring toward the front door. Or rather, the space beside it. An empty stretch of hallway that suddenly felt like the center of everything. Adrian, I repeated, softer this time, almost afraid to break the moment. He turned just enough to see me over his shoulder. His voice was low, strained. There was someone here. A chill ran down my spine. What do you mean here? He motioned toward the door frame. I heard movement. Not settling noises. Not the pipes. Footsteps. My heart thudded painfully. Could it be a neighbor? Someone outside? He shook his head. No. This was inside. The air thin. Inside. In our apartment. My chest tightened as a truth I'd been avoiding pressed harder. The shadow I'd seen at my door, the creak of wood, the presence I'd felt. It might not have been Adrian. What did you see? I whispered. He hesitated, and that hesitation scared me more than anything. A shape, he said finally. Someone standing here. When I came out, they moved. He paused. Too fast. Could it have been? I swallowed, the word catching on. Fear, me. He turned fully, then, eyes sharp. No. You were in my room. The admission hung heavy between us, what it implied, what we'd almost talked about, what we almost did, before the shadow interrupted everything. For a moment, neither of us breathed, then he stepped closer, voice dropping lower. You shouldn't sleep alone tonight. The words hit me in a way they shouldn't have, equal parts comfort and something dangerously close to desire. Something that crossed a boundary we hadn't named but both felt. Adrian, I started, unsure what I was trying to say. He stepped closer still. Close enough that the faint warmth of his breath met my cheek. Close enough that if I leaned forward even a little, our foreheads would touch. His voice was barely above a whisper. You don't have to be scared. But the look in his eyes, dark, conflicted, protective, wanting, terrified me more than the sound in the hallway, not because it was dangerous, but because it wasn't. Something shifted between us in that moment. Something fragile and taboo and undeniable. The kind of shift you can't take back. His hand lifted slightly, hovering near my arm, but he didn't touch. He stopped himself, fingers trembling in the air as if fighting a decision that might ruin everything, and then, another sound. A soft tap, somewhere behind us. We both stiffened. Adrian's hand dropped instantly. His expression hardened, the vulnerability vanishing behind something sharp and guarded. Go to your room, he whispered. Lock the door. What about you? I'll check it out. I opened my mouth to protest, but he shook his head with a firmness that left no room for argument. I walked backward toward my room, pulse racing. Before I closed the door, I saw him turn toward the living room again, moving with slow, deliberate caution, like he expected something to jump out of the darkness at any moment. I shut my door quietly and leaned against it, breath unsteady. Another tap echoed, then a soft scrape. Then silence. I didn't know where Adrian was. I didn't know if the sound was him. Or something else. My hand hovered over the lock. I hesitated. A long moment passed. Then, finally, I turned the lock. The click echoed through the room, too loud, too final, and I stood there, alone in the quiet, with one crushing, unresolved question. If something was in the apartment with us, was Adrian protecting me from it, or from himself? Want me to continue? Fire conclusion, cliffhanger, 400 to 600 words, next, or artist palette visual prompts for all sections. I spent the rest of the night listening to the silence, to the wind scraping branches against the window, to my heartbeat echoing far too loudly in a room that suddenly felt like it belonged to someone else. Every few minutes, I thought I heard Adrian's footsteps in the hallway. Every few minutes, I wasn't sure. My door remained locked, but it didn't make me feel safer, just trapped. Just more aware of how thin the wood was. Of how close he was. Or whoever that shadow belonged to. When dawn finally arrived, it slipped into the room in faint streaks of grey-blue light, softening the edges of the nightmare but not dissolving it. I opened my door slowly, breath held, half expecting to find something, but the hallway was empty, and Adrian's door, always closed before, was half open, like an invitation or a warning. Or both. He wasn't inside. A cold twist ran through me. Adrian? I found him in the kitchen, sitting at the table, hands wrapped around a mug of untouched coffee, staring at nothing. He looked like he'd been there for hours. His voice was quiet when he finally spoke. "Did you sleep?" "No," he nodded, as if he expected that. As if he didn't sleep either. I stood across from him, waiting, hoping he'd explain what he saw, what he heard, why his face looked so raw and hollow. But he didn't speak, and somehow that silence was worse. Finally, I sat down. "Adrian, what happened last night?" He exhaled slowly. Too slowly. "I don't know." "That's not true." His jaw clenched. A flicker of emotion crossed his face. Fear? Frustration? Guilt, but disappeared too quickly to name. After a long pause, he said, "Something was in the apartment. I'm not pretending that didn't happen." Then his eyes lifted to mine, dark, tired, and frighteningly honest. "But I don't know if it was someone or something else." My stomach dropped. "Something else? You mean, I don't know?" He ran a hand through his hair. "I just know it wasn't you." His gaze held mine too intensely, and it wasn't me. A chill crept down my spine. He leaned forward, voice dropping. "Whatever you saw that night at your door, I don't think it was me. But I also don't think it wanted you to know that." My breath hitched. "So what do we do?" He stared at the table. "We stay alert. We stay careful. Then, after a beat, and we don't sleep alone." That last part hung between us, heavy, dangerous, too intimate for morning light. I wasn't sure if he meant it for safety. Or something else, something he didn't know how to say out loud. When I didn't respond, he finally looked at me again, really looked at me. "It's not over," he whispered. My pulse spiked. "What do you mean?" He swallowed hard. "I found something." My skin prickled. "Found what?" Slowly, he pushed something across the table. My journal. Open. A page I had never written. A page written in a hand that was not mine. A hand that was not Adrian's. 5 words. Words that changed everything. "I watch you both sleep." I stared at the sentence, breath frozen in my throat. Adrian whispered, "We're not alone in this apartment." And then, something knocked, once soft, slow, right outside the kitchen door. "If you want, I can create artist palette visual prompts for the entire story. OR Blue Book Part 2, new tension arc, new mystery, new conflict. Just tell me what you want next." I should have ignored the way Adrian's door stayed slightly open, like a paused breath, like a hand reaching out but not touching. I should have ignored the way he looked back at me before disappearing into the hallway, a glance too sharp, too aware, too deliberate, but I didn't. Instead, I sat frozen on the couch, my heart pounding against my ribs like it wanted out. The apartment had fallen silent again, thick, tense silence, the kind that felt full instead of empty, the kind that meant something was about to happen. After several minutes, I stood. I wasn't sure if it was curiosity, dread, or something far more complicated that pushed me toward the hallway. Shadows stretched long across the floor, bisected by a faint, cold glow from the bathroom nightlight. His door was still open, just an inch, just enough. I stopped in front of it. "Adrian." My voice was barely audible. "No answer." My hand hesitated on the edge of the door. My pulse hammered so loudly I thought he might hear it from inside. Slowly, I pushed the door open. The room was dim, lit only by a sliver of streetlight sneaking through the blinds. Adrian sat on the edge of his bed, elbows on his knees, hands clasped loosely. His head was bowed, as if he'd been thinking or waiting. He didn't look up at first. When he finally did, his eyes found me in less than a second. No surprise. No confusion, just recognition, like he'd known I would come. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He just watched me stand there, framed in the doorway, frozen between entering and leaving. His voice broke the silence. "First, you're still awake." "It wasn't a question. Couldn't sleep," I said quietly. His gaze flicked down for a moment, then returned to mine. "Yeah. I figured." Something in his tone made my stomach tighten. It wasn't mocking. It wasn't cold. It was knowing. I took one step inside. Immediately, the air felt different, warmer, charged, like crossing an invisible boundary. Adrian's eyes followed the movement, slow and deliberate. "What are you doing?" he asked softly. I don't know." A faint smile ghosted across his lips. Not amused. More like he understood something I still didn't want to admit. "Why was my journal in here?" The question came out before I could stop it. His jaw tightened, just a flicker, but real. That was the first time I'd ever truly seen him caught off guard. He leaned back slightly, hands resting on the mattress beside him. He exhaled slowly. "I shouldn't have," he said. "I know that." "That's not an answer." His eyes darkened, conflicted, maybe guilty, maybe something else entirely. "You dropped it in the living room," he said. "A few days ago. I thought you might want someone to talk to. That doesn't explain why it was under your hoodie. Or why you didn't give it back." Silence, heavy, complicated silence. He looked down at his hands. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. "I wanted to understand you." The words hit harder than I expected. "You could have just asked. I didn't think you'd tell me." Something in my chest twisted. He wasn't wrong. I kept people at a distance. I kept myself hidden. Adrian, seeing through that, seeing me, felt too intimate, too exposed. And yet I didn't walk away. I stepped closer. "Why?" I whispered. "Why try to understand me?" He lifted his gaze again, and for the first time, I saw vulnerability there, raw, unguarded. "Because you don't let people in," he said. "And maybe I thought you'd let me." The room felt suffocating. Or maybe it was just the honesty. I sat down beside him before I even realized I'd moved. The mattress dipped slightly under my weight. Our knees almost touched. "Almost. Were you standing at my door last night?" I asked. He inhaled sharply. Not guilt, not denial, something harder to read. "I heard you move," he said slowly. "I wanted to check on you." "That's not what you were doing." Silence again. Then, without warning, he said, "You looked scared." My breath caught. He had been there. My heart raced, but I couldn't pull away. Not when we were this close, not when the air between us hummed with something charged, something fragile, something dangerous. "How long were you there?" I asked. His throat bobbed as he swallowed. "Longer than I should have been." The room tilted for a second. I felt the meaning of his admission settle into my bones, unwelcome and yet not entirely unwanted. "Why?" I whispered again. His answer came out strained, as if torn from somewhere deep. I was trying to decide if I should knock. I didn't know what to say. He exhaled shakily, rubbing a hand over his face. "I knew it was wrong, okay? I knew I shouldn't. His voice faltered, then steadied. "I didn't want to wake you. Or bother you. Or scare you. You did." He winced at that. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "I didn't mean to. I just didn't know how to talk to you." "Talk to me about what?" His eyes lifted to mine, direct, unflinching, almost broken. "About the fact that he stopped himself. My heart pounded painfully. "That you what?" I breathed. He didn't answer. Instead, he looked at me like the truth was too heavy to say, and too dangerous to keep inside. His hand moved, hesitant, cautious, resting just a few inches from mine on the bed. "Not touching." "Not yet." But close enough that I felt the warmth radiate from his skin. He whispered, almost to himself, "This is a bad idea." But he didn't pull away. I didn't either. His breathing grew uneven, quiet, shaky, as if he were fighting something inside himself. The conflict played across his expression: want, fear, guilt, longing, restraint, all twisted together. Then, a loud crack echoed from the hallway. We both froze. Not the building settling, not a pipe, not something random. This sound was sharp. Intentional, almost like a footstep. Adrian's head snapped toward the door. Mine did too. The hallway was dark. Empty, but a shadow had moved. I was sure of it. He stood up slowly, posture rigid, scanning the darkness outside the room. I watched his shoulders tighten, watched his breathing shift into something alert and protective for the first time. He looked genuinely afraid, and that terrified me more than the sound itself. He whispered, barely audible, "Stay here." Then he stepped into the hallway, disappearing into the dark, leaving me alone in his room, heart racing, breath shallow, mind spiraling with a single, consuming question. If he wasn't the one standing outside my door last night, then who was? If you want, I can continue immediately with fire falling action, 600 to 800 words. Our artist palette provide visual prompts for each section. Just tell me. I always thought mornings in our house were predictable, almost painfully so. The same soft hum of the old refrigerator. The same pale light leaking through the sheer curtains. The same quiet groan from the wooden floorboards as I dragged myself into the kitchen, half asleep, half functioning. But that morning, something felt off before I even opened my eyes. I remember lying there, listening. The silence was too complete, too delicate, like the air itself was waiting for something to happen. Usually, I'd hear Daniel moving around by now, pacing, humming, sometimes arguing with himself over which shirt to wear. He hated being late for work. He hated rushing even more, but that morning, nothing. The absence echoed louder than any sound could have. I pushed myself up, rubbing my eyes. The bed beside me was cold. Not just empty, cold. As if he had been gone for hours. A strange ache bloomed in my chest, a soft twisting that I tried to ignore. Daniel was a grown man, not a child who needed constant monitoring. People left early sometimes. People had errands. People existed beyond the tight little world of our shared routines, and yet, he never left without saying goodbye. When I walked into the kitchen, I noticed his mug on the counter, still unwashed, still holding the faint scent of cinnamon and coffee. But his keys were gone. His jacket too. It was as if he'd slipped out of the house in the dark without wanting anyone to notice. That wasn't like him, not at all. I tried to shake it off, tried to tell myself I was overthinking again. I poured myself a glass of water, letting the coolness ground me. Outside, the sky was a dull grey, thick clouds swelling like they were hiding secrets of their own. The air smelled like rain, the kind that arrives suddenly and without apology. That's when I saw it. A small scrap of fabric on the floor near the hallway, dark, silky, unfamiliar. At first I thought it was part of Daniel's tie collection, the ones he rarely touched but kept just in case. But when I picked it up, the fabric was softer than any tie he owned. More delicate. More intimate, and it definitely didn't belong to either of us. My chest tightened. I heard my own heartbeat in my ears. Why was something like this in our house, and why did it smell faintly, barely, of cologne I didn't recognize? I swallowed hard, forcing myself to breathe. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it belonged to a friend who had visited. Maybe it fell from a shopping bag. Maybe I was letting my imagination run wild again, maybe. But as I stood there in that half-lit hallway, holding a stranger's garment between my fingers, I couldn't ignore the feeling crawling up my spine, the sense that something had shifted overnight, quietly but unmistakably, something Daniel didn't want to tell me, something I wasn't supposed to find. And then, from the back of the house, I heard a soft thud. A door closing. Or opening. I couldn't tell. I froze. Was I still alone? But some subtle shift clung to the air, like a ghost of the night before. The hallway light, usually a warm yellow, looked paler. The shadows sat heavier in the corners. Even the hum of the refrigerator sounded strained, as if the apartment itself had woken up anxious. I kept replaying that creak of my door. Was someone actually there, or did my mind conjure a figure out of exhaustion and nerves? I found myself hovering outside Adrian's room longer than I should have. His door was shut, as always. Smooth. Untouched. Too quiet behind it. I could have knocked. I didn't. Instead, I walked into the kitchen, pretending that I wasn't listening for footsteps behind me. Coffee. I needed coffee. I needed something normal. The kettle hissed softly as I filled it. The window above the sink was fogged from the morning chill, leaving only a smear of pale winter light on the counter. Outside, the street looked washed out and muted, cars moving slowly, people bundled in scarves, the sky a dull, heavy grey routine. calm. A day like any other, and yet, I couldn't shake the thought someone had been in my doorway. As I poured the coffee, I heard Adrian's door open, a soft click followed by gentle footsteps. My pulse tightened, and for a moment, I didn't look back. I wanted to see him before he saw my expression. I needed to know if he looked guilty, uneasy, tired, but his voice reached me first. Morning. Calm. Low. A little rough, like he'd barely slept. I turned slowly. He stood in the hallway wearing a loose black t-shirt and joggers, hair slightly messy, I still adjusting to the light. Morning, I echoed, trying to sound neutral, but he was studying me, not casually or not like someone glancing at a roommate. No, this gaze was thorough, like he was checking for something. Sleep okay? He asked, too specific, too targeted. I swallowed. Yeah, why? He shrugged. Just asking. But his voice carried something else, an edge I couldn't place. Maybe curiosity. Maybe worry. Or maybe he was trying to confirm whether I'd noticed something last night. He walked past me, and I caught a faint scent on him, soap, cold air, something earthy. Familiar, yet not a smell I'd associated with him before. My stomach did a strange twist. He reached for a mug but hesitated. You already made enough coffee for two. I always do, I lied. I didn't. It was a habit I used to have with someone else, someone long gone. Adrian nodded, but his eyes lingered on mine for 1 second too long before he poured himself a cup. Silence settled between us. Not uncomfortable, just watchful. Finally, I said, you were up late, huh? He didn't look at me when he answered, couldn't sleep. My heart gave a quiet jolt. Yeah, I murmured. Me too. He finally looked up then. His expression shifted very slightly, surprise, maybe interest, maybe recognition. But he didn't ask why. He didn't have to. We were talking about two different things and somehow the same thing. His eyes flicked briefly toward the hallway, toward my room, the smallest gesture, but I caught it and he knew I caught it. That was the first moment I felt it, the unspoken thread pulling between us, something unfinished, something waiting. The day passed in a strange haze of almost normalcy. He left for work mid-morning. I stayed home finishing assignments. But the apartment didn't feel empty after he left. It felt observed. Late afternoon light bled through the blinds, dust floating lazily in the glow. I tried to focus, but every quiet sound pricked at my nerves, the settling floorboards, the branch tapping the window, the distant laughter from the neighbor's TV. It all kept looping back to that shadow in my doorway. Did I imagine it, or was Adrian standing there? By evening, the tension in my chest had grown into something restless. I found myself hovering in the hallway again, this time outside his room. Not to snoop. Not really. Just to look. The door was slightly ajar. That alone was unusual. Adrian was meticulous about his space. Always neat, always closed off, physically and emotionally. I nudged the door open a little more, just enough to peek. His room was dim but tidy, bed neatly made, nightstand minimal, books stacked precisely. But something caught my eye, a hoodie crumpled on the floor near the foot of his bed. Odd. He never left clothes lying around. I stepped inside, not sure why, not sure what I expected to find. The room smelled faintly of cedarwood, clean linens, and something warmer underneath. Something familiar. I knelt and picked up the hoodie the moment I lifted it. My breath caught. Underneath, partially hidden, was my notebook. My journal. My handwriting unmistakable on the cover. I froze. Why was my journal in his room? I hadn't even realized it was missing. A cold rush went through me. Not anger, something more tangled than that. Something that blurred the line between violation and vulnerability. Did he read it? Did he go through my things? And if he did, what exactly was he looking for? I heard the front door unlock. Adrian, panic shot through me. I placed the notebook back exactly where it had been, slid the hoodie over it, and slipped out of the room as quickly and quietly as I could. By the time he reached the hallway, I was in the living room pretending to scroll through my phone. He walked in carrying a grocery bag, shoulders slightly tense, eyes flicking over the space as if checking for disturbances. Hey, he said. You ate yet? Not yet. He set the bag on the counter, but kept watching me from the corner of his eye. His expression was unreadable, calm, but with a layer of alertness beneath it. As he unpacked the groceries, I swallowed and asked, did you do anything today? After work. He paused just for a second. No, he said smoothly. Just errands. A lie. I could hear it. I could feel it, and he knew I heard it. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed loosely, and tilted his head. Why? I forced a shrug. Just curious. His jaw tightened, not in irritation. More like concern. Maybe even caution. He approached me slowly, each step deliberate. When he stopped in front of me, he was close enough for me to feel the warmth radiating off him. His voice dropped a fraction. A softer tone. A careful one. You seem off today. You do too, I said before I could stop myself. He blinked once, surprised, then a small, knowing smile touched the corner of his mouth. Maybe, he murmured. Maybe we both had weird nights. My chest tightened again. He knew. I knew he knew, but he wasn't admitting anything, and neither was I. Later that night, we ended up watching TV together for the first time. Usually he stayed in his room, but today he lingered, hovering near me, choosing the seat closest to mine, stealing glances every time the screen cast shifting shadows across my face. It wasn't normal, none of it was. Halfway through the movie, the building made a loud crack, a pipe contracting from the cold. I jumped slightly. Adrian didn't, but he did look at me with this slow, studying calm, not mocking, not amused. Something else. Something that made heat rise under my skin. You okay? His voice was quiet, concerned, too gentle. I nodded. He kept watching me for several seconds longer than necessary, as if the jump had confirmed something for him. Something he'd suspected. As the movie continued, I became hyper-aware of his presence, his breathing, his body heat, the faint rustle of fabric when he shifted positions. Twice, I thought his knee brushed mine. Maybe it was an accident, maybe not. The room was dim except for the flickering light of the TV, casting both of us in shifting shadows. And in that darkness, I felt the question growing larger. What is he not telling me? And worse, what is he waiting for? By the time the movie ended, the apartment had settled into a heavy silence. Neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke. Adrian turned his head, eyes still on me. You ever get the feeling, he said slowly, that someone's watching you? Even when you're alone. My heart slammed once, hard. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. He waited, then, without breaking eye contact, he added, just curious. But it wasn't curiosity. It was something else, something darker, something that made the room feel smaller. I finally managed to whisper, why do you ask? He didn't answer. He just smiled. A faint, unreadable smile, and then he stood up and walked down the hallway, leaving me in silence, and leaving his door slightly open behind him. As if inviting me or daring me. Either way, the line between curiosity and fear blurred until I couldn't tell which was which. Man, for the first time, I wondered, not whether Adrian had been standing outside my door the night before, but what he might do tonight. If you want, I can continue with fire. Climactic moment, 800. 1,200 words, sparkles, or I can give you visual prompts for each section. Just tell me. Before that night, Adrian was just my roommate, quiet, polite, a little mysterious, sure, but harmless in the way beautiful people sometimes are. The kind of guy who made silence feel comfortable, not awkward. The kind who always smelled faintly of cedar and cold winter air. The kind who could stand 2 feet away from me and somehow feel closer than anyone I'd ever known. And then, after that night, I started questioning everything. My safety, my sanity, and him. But maybe I should start earlier, before the shadows in the hallway, before the sound of my own name whispered through the dark, before I woke to something standing over me. Back when Adrian first moved in. I remember the way he walked into the apartment that day, no smile, just a tired nod, his gaze scanning the room like he was checking for exits. I should have found it unsettling. Instead, I found myself wanting to know why. He caught me staring. Is the room at the end mine? His voice was deeper than I expected. Calm, steady, but with a rough edge that felt lived in. Yeah, I said. I cleaned it out this morning. Thanks. He paused. You didn't have to do that. The way he said it, soft, almost hesitant, lodged itself somewhere in my chest. Over the next few weeks, we settled into a rhythm. Shared breakfasts. Occasional late-night conversations in the dim light of the kitchen. Laughter that felt too intimate for 2 people who barely knew each other. And the way he'd look at me sometimes, like he wanted to say something he couldn't or shouldn't. I didn't realize how much I'd grown used to him being there, his presence, his warmth, the subtle safety he carried with him, until the night that sense of safety shattered. It started with a noise. A soft thud from the hallway, not loud enough to wake me completely. Just enough to pull me somewhere between sleep and consciousness. I remember thinking it was Adrian. I remember wanting to call out to him, but something in me hesitated, some instinct, some fear, some reminder that the dark can make strangers out of the people you think you know. I lay still, eyes half open, watching the shadow on the wall shift, slow, deliberate, not quite aligning with the rhythm of breathing I heard from across the apartment. It wasn't until the shadow stopped right beside my bed that my breath caught in my throat, and then a whisper. My name, soft, close. Too close. I froze. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe, and for one terrifying second, I thought, this isn't Adrian. But when I jolted fully awake, the shadow was gone, the hallway was empty, the apartment was silent, and Adrian's door was still closed, tightly, like he hadn't left his room all night. And that's when I felt it, the first crack of doubt, the first hint that something was very wrong, the beginning of everything that followed. If you want next, small blue diamond, rising action. 1,000 to 1,500 words, small blue diamond, climactic moment, 800 to 1,200 words, small blue diamond, falling action, 600 to 800 words, small blue diamond. Visual prompts for each section. Just tell me.